Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and transformational life coach and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Hi guys, welcome back to yet another episode of the Life with Grief podcast. And I'm going to start this off by saying I have a little confession. I was not planning on doing this episode. I decided literally within the last 24 to 48 hours to record this. As of the time of this recording, it is the day before it's going to launch, and it is the day before my mom's Angel Day, death anniversary, whatever you want to call it. And it's not that I wasn't going to do this episode because I didn't want to talk about it or because I didn't want to acknowledge it, or I just wanted to kind of gloss over it. Of course, it's a hard day, but frankly, I did this episode last year, sort of like a recap of how I was feeling being 4 years out then from losing my mom. This is year 5. This is dare I say, a bit of a milestone. But honestly, the reason I sort of didn't intend on doing this episode this year was because I was sort of like, well, I did this last year. I didn't think I'd have anything new to say, honestly. I just didn't want to sound like a broken record and sort of say what I said last year. And the more I thought about it and the more it started sort of coming to me, boy, I was wrong. I don't know that I'm going to say anything similar to what I did last year, maybe some things, but the reason I'm doing this episode is because it is such a testament to how grief truly does change over time and how having new things in our life happen forces our grief to evolve with us. And that has been the case for me in this last year. And had I not had my daughter, maybe I wouldn't have as much to say here. I don't know. But I wanted to come on here and talk about it and really also make this episode not just about me sort of just talking all about me and all about my mom, but this episode, I'm going to preface a couple things here. Number one, I would definitely say this episode is more of just like a validation episode. So if you guys know or have been listening here for a while, I always try and give coping tools, and some episodes are a little more formatted in that way. This is going to be a bit more of a free-flowing episode, a little bit shorter, but I wanted to just in a very raw and real way, share how I'm feeling, but also really just validate anybody here who is under any pressure from society, from friends or family, from people around you to think that grief is on any kind of timeline, or that you should be over it or getting over it, or that you're doing grief wrong or anything like that. I want this episode today to just give you some peace of mind and just be a testament to the fact that there literally is no timeline when we are grieving. And basically me talking about my mom and this 5 years out from her death thing is just kind of an example of that. But I am thinking of all of the listeners here who have lost a mom, who have lost a parent, who have lost a mother figure. My heart is so with you right now. I was really in my feels yesterday with my mom's Angel Day, whatever you want to call it, being tomorrow. For some reason, it hit me really hard yesterday. That's grief, right? It just happens when it happens. We'll see how I feel tomorrow. Today, I feel a little bit better, but it has been really weighing on me lately. And not to mention, my mom died around the holidays. She died December 9th, 2019. So my heart also is with any of you who have lost a loved one around a major holiday, November, December especially. In the US here, we have Thanksgiving, whatever it is you celebrate, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all of the things. Maybe it's a birthday that's around this time. I mean, the holidays just amplify losses like that. And I have talked to a crazy amount of people, or know someone who has lost a loved one on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And I just, again, want to validate that the holidays are hard enough without our loved ones, let alone losing someone literally on that holiday. I mean, our holidays are already forever altered after that, right? But it just leaves this undeniable mark on that day that just changes us the rest of our life. And that is yet another reason why grief and these losses are such a big deal, and why they deserve to be acknowledged and recognized as something that does not have a timeline and doesn't have an end date, and why it continues to evolve, because every year is going to feel different. And for me, and especially as a grief coach, I laugh at myself how I didn't sort of originally think that this year might be that different from last year. I think it's just because, like, okay, like in my head, I was like, how different could year 4 and year 5 be? And again, I was so wrong. So we'll dig into that. But I also just want to mention here that I am going to be bringing up my daughter, my infant daughter. If there is anyone here listening who has been through the loss of a child, the loss of a pregnancy, just a little bit of a trigger warning. I'm not going to talk about her at length, but she is something that has really brought a lot of happiness and joy to my life. And I want to acknowledge that. And I'm going to talk a little bit just about that. So I just don't want that to be trigger. I can understand how it's triggering. And so if it is, feel free to fast forward through that, pause this episode, or just come back to it when you feel like you might be in a better headspace to do that. I just wanted to acknowledge that for any bereaved parents that might be listening here. So just to kind of talk about how I'm feeling, and again, depending on where you are in your grieving journey, maybe you're not exactly 5 years out. Maybe you just lost your mom, or it's, a little fresher for you, or maybe you're even more years down the line. You might use this episode as a way to potentially brace for things to come. I don't know. I just wanted to share what was on my heart today. And yeah, I think this is just really important to talk about, because for anyone who ever says that it gets easier over time, I don't say this to fearmonger or scare anybody, but it just doesn't. It doesn't get easier. What I find is that, sure, the shock, the anguish in the beginning, that is just so unbearable, unspeakably painful. We're desperate for contact with them again. Like, there's so much newness around our life without them, and figuring out what that means and what that looks like. And that feels very scary. We can have a lot of fear. It's very uncomfortable. You just feel kind of like you're walking on eggshells. I mean, however you want to sort of put it. I definitely felt that way once my mom died. I mean, it was just such a shock to my system. And I think just the circumstances around her death, the fact that she died from esophageal cancer as she did, which was also a whole nother thing that I was trying to process, and everything I had witnessed with her health decline in the last 7 to 8 months of her life, like things like that took me a really long time to, I hate to say get comfortable with, because I'm never going to be comfortable with that, but like to process that, right? Now I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, I've processed that, but it's like I still find myself, I'm going to say shocked, but it's like shocked in a different way. It's like still confused in a different way, where I'm like, wow, that all really happened. And it's interesting because now I'm at a point where 5 years, I mean, I guess it's all in the eye of the beholder if you feel like that's a long time or not. I mean, compared to having just lost someone, yeah, that's a minute, right? It's been a minute since I lost my mom. But I'm in this like really weird space where I feel like it was like just yesterday, but I still cannot believe it's been 5 years. And that feels like a long time ago. And it's scary too, because there are certain times where I feel like I'm forgetting, I don't know, her voice, her mannerisms, things she would have said or done. And I like question whether I'm remembering things right. And I'm an only child, so I feel a lot of pressure to remember that. I don't have siblings to like bounce things off of or talk about it in that way. And just because you have siblings doesn't necessarily mean you might have a great relationship with them or that you can do that, right? I want to acknowledge that too, but that's hard. And especially now having my daughter, I feel a lot of pressure to make sure she knows them and remembers them. And that's really difficult because she's never going to meet them. And that's a whole nother level of grief that I've had to navigate and cope with this year. So I don't know. It's a lot of really conflicting emotions and thoughts. I'm still trying to process like how my mom died so young. She was 62, 63, I think it was. I can't even remember now. And for me, that's young. I mean, I know there's younger deaths out there. Okay, I want to acknowledge that, but you know, for how long people tend to be living nowadays, that feels young to me. And that feels wrong. And it's like I'll never make sense of that. And I know that. It's like, but my heart still is trying to. And I can't really control that. It just is what it is. I don't know. I think it's just a very human thing to try and have some logic around things like that and make sense of thoughts and feelings like that. And because it's like we're just constantly sort of racking our brain trying to figure out why they were dealt the hand of cards that they were, and then by default why we had to go through that. And it's like one of the most confounding things that we have to go through when we lose someone. So here I am navigating it, trying to navigate it. I am still loving my life. And again, I'm just sharing very honest thoughts here. I am still joyful. I'm still grateful, but I am also still very griefy. And I'll never not be grieving. I'll never not be sad. There will never be a time where it doesn't just randomly kind of knock me off kilter a little bit. And that's a really hard thing to live with because, you know, if you are living life with grief, it can knock you off your foundation at any moment. It's very unassuming sometimes. It's very, you know, we kind of don't see it coming. And that's exhausting. Like, I just want to acknowledge that. I've been posting more about this on Instagram and things lately as far as like exhaustion that we can feel with grief. And for me, like last night, I felt really exhausted. And I think it's because I honestly hadn't like cried about my mom for a long time. And it's not because I'm not sad. It's not because I don't miss her. I am just not the biggest crier, but like when it comes up for me, it comes up. And what's funny, well, I guess that's funny for lack of a better term, but for me, what's funny is like when I cry, I never push away tears. Like if I have to cry, I cry. I own it. I think for me, sometimes the reason I don't feel like crying is because sometimes I get a headache afterwards. My face feels puffy. Like sometimes I just don't want to feel that way. But at the same time, and what always trumps that is like, I know I need to let this out. I know these emotions need to go somewhere. And if, for me personally, if I haven't cried for a while or something is coming up for me, that is my indication that physically I need to release that. And I need to own that. And I just need to let it out and, you know, shake it off and, you know, get into the somatics of my grief and how that is being stored in my body. And that's a really important thing that I've learned as someone who is grieving, but also as a grief coach, and how important that is, and how trauma and how grief and, you know, loss can show up for us physically. So I invite you today to really get in touch with that, because we might not realize how much we're really holding in. And so that is something I've really come in touch with in these last several years, since my mom died. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's a lot to think about how much we really handle and cope with and carry on a day-to-day basis. But again, it is such a testament to how the grief and the sadness and the anger and confusion and anguish and all of these things truly can coexist with laughter and joy and all of the other beautiful things that life can bring along with it. But in saying that, I would be remiss if I didn't just sort of say and admit out loud that as happy as I am, as joyful as I am, as grateful as I am for everything I do have, it's kind of trippy because I know I'm a happy person, but I also know how much happier I would be if my parents were still here. And living with that void is one of the most like confounding, horrible things that I have to live with, and that grievers just like you have to live with too. Knowing that like maybe you're doing okay, or maybe you're even doing better than you thought you would, but then you think about it for a moment and you're like, wow, okay, I'm doing well, but imagine how much better I would be doing if they were still here. That's heavy. That is a burden to carry. And I want to acknowledge that today. If you are in that position too, and you can relate to that feeling, because I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, is that we can be surrounded by so much love and, a great job and a lovely home and all of these beautiful things. But if it is not the person or the people that you're missing, none of that really makes up for it. And that's okay to admit. That's something we need to admit and just own. And there's no fixing that. There's just sitting with it and holding space for it and knowing that you are not alone in feeling that way. So just to transition into motherhood really quick, and there's going to be more episodes where I'm going to talk about sort of like navigating motherhood without my mom, without my dad, without my parents. So I will just sort of high level touch on this right now, since my intention is for this to be sort of a shorter episode. We'll see. But I just wanted to also say, now being a mother myself, and this is where really the inspiration for this episode came in and why I felt compelled to talk about this year, is because I feel that my grief is hitting me harder this year maybe than ever before, outside of like year 1 and year 2, because of my daughter. Because my mom and my dad are not here to see any of it. And I believe that my parents are around, and I'm never here to, force my beliefs on our loved ones still being around on anyone. If you think that we die and all you see is black and that's it and you're done, like, that's fine. You do you. I personally think we are all made of energy and there is sort of a life after death. I don't know how it works, but I feel like there's more after. So I do feel that my parents are around and seeing everything going on. But that does not make up for the fact that they are not here in person, physically, able to hug me, able to hug my daughter and play with her and be the incredible grandparents I know they would have been. And that is why it is hitting me really hard. I think, like, the more I was reflecting on this, I was kind of like, why is it really hitting me harder this year? And I didn't have to dig very deep for that. I knew it pretty much right away. I was like, it's because I've become a mom. And I need my parents now more than ever. Period. Like, I needed them the last several years, don't get me wrong. But there are so many experiences now that they're not here for, that I'm missing with them. That is going to be the case for the rest of my life. And that is like a crazy thing to have to think about and wrap your head around, and you feel like you never really can. Yeah, it's just painful. That's just painful. I wish I had a more eloquent way of wording this. Again, I'm really just like letting my thoughts and feelings flow here. But sometimes that's the reality of grief, right? We almost can't put words to it. It just sucks. And that is a very, very key reason that I wanted to do this episode, because as a griever and as a grief coach, I cannot sit here and say it gets easier, because it doesn't. Honestly, it doesn't. It evolves and it hurts in different ways. That is my thought and feeling on it. You do not have to share that. And again, I don't say this to be like such a downer, but I think it's really realistic. And I think this is like really realistic for what a lot of grievers feel. And a lot of people, and I've seen this so often. I've been doing some Instagram lives recently and people share this, or they share this in comments. And I've seen this theme. And this is another reason I wanted to do this episode, because I feel like so many people are feeling this. There is this, I mean, this is not new, but I feel like there's this shift going on in our like societally, where people are like, I don't understand why people think the first year is the worst. Like, yeah, it's really bad, but I'm like year 3, year 4, year 5, however many years it's been, and it is worse for me. And I get that. I so feel that. And I think the reason for that is because of the permanence that starts to come with it. And it seeps into our bones, into our soul. And these losses, these voids, they are a part of us now. And it's a void that we will never fill. And that's a lot to have to grapple with, and a lot to live with. But here's the thing for me, what I can now proudly say, and sort of where it's almost like a badge of honor, is like, yes, this is a void that I will never fill. And I don't even want to fill it. I don't even need to. I'm not trying to fill it with anything, because that is my mom's place. That is my dad's place. And that is a sacred space that I hold just for them. And the fact that I have experienced a love so deep and so profound that I can do that, I almost hate to say like, how lucky am I? But how lucky am I? And if you feel the same, how lucky are you that you have experienced such a love in your life? There are people out there that do not experience love like this. And is it really freaking painful when it's stripped away from us? Absolutely. And that's where we can support and uplift each other today, and just hold that space and say, listen, I can't fix this. All we can really say is how, excuse my language, but how shitty this is. But here we are. We are here together, and not even relish in the heaviness or the darkness of that, but like just like on a human to human, a soul to soul level, be like, this sucks. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. But also, how amazing is it that we had these people to bless our life for however long they did. It's such a push-pull, you guys. I get it. It's I think for so many of us, we're like, yeah, we're so lucky that we got to have this love that we did. But like, I want them back. I want them here. I so feel you on that. Just because we've loved and lost doesn't make up for the fact that they're not here. I'll never say that. That's never going to feel fair. That's never going to feel okay. It's just a missing of my mom and a missing of my dad that it continues to ache and hurt in places that I continue to find that I didn't know were there. And what I wouldn't give for 30 seconds with her. For one realistic dream where I can hug her. I mean, literally, I would settle for that. The things I would give. And if you're listening to this, I'm sure you can relate to that in a lot of ways. And I'm going to get emotional, but yeah, just the connections that we have with our loved ones, it is cellular. It is, I've said this before on this podcast, it is just a tether that cannot be broken by the end of someone's physical life. And that is something I cling to. And I hope you know that and you cling to that too. And just realize how incredible it is that, yeah, it's something that we will maybe never experience again. And I am really feeling this now with my mom, because it's like, yeah, I'm never going to experience this again because I will never have another mom. I only had one and she's gone. But like, I still feel so like intrinsically tied to her. And it's just being this far out, that is a really weird, trippy thing that I am still trying to make sense of 5 years later. And I'm realizing, like I said, the permanence of that and how much this really is going to affect me the rest of our life. And I feel like that permanence is like almost like just now finally going to get to me. But I also feel like this has been really magnified since becoming a mom myself, because I understand now more than ever that mother-daughter bond. I understood it before because I had a mom, right? I still do. But having my own child now and being on sort of her side of it, I understand it on a level that I never have. And that is what has really changed for me this year. And it has made me re-grieve things. It has brought up new grief. And this is why grief does not operate on a timeline. Whether it is a big life change, whether it is a small life change, whether you barely even have any life changes, grief is an everlasting thing that, like I was saying earlier, evolves and takes on new shapes and forms and has new emotions tied to it and attached to it. And we're always kind of trying to make sense of it. But it's why I also encourage finding a community. And if that is through me in this podcast or Losses Become Gains, that's amazing. Or whatever feels right and good to you. That is how we can begin to feel less alone and less isolated and less lonely. Because this process, as I sort of alluded to earlier, you can be around the most amazing people. You can have a great support system. Whether that support system is there for you or not, it doesn't matter. I almost don't care. It's like, if you don't have people around you that really get it, and you almost like don't even have to say much to each other to really be like, I see you. And I'm not even here to try and fix it. I just can understand the emotions you're going through. It makes such a difference in this process. And I have people around me that are amazing. My husband, for example, like, amazing man, wonderful person, but cannot relate to losing two parents. And that is not his fault, nor do I wish that on him or anybody. But that has made me feel more isolated and alone sometimes. And now, since I have become a mother, that is, again, it's just been magnified. I mean, it's tenfold for me now. And that is something I'm really trying to process. But making friends with other women who have lost their moms, who are also parents, has been pivotal and low-key life-changing. And that's all I can really encourage today. That is your coping tool for the day. Because as you know, if you listen to this podcast, I always like to leave you with something that finding your tribe, so to speak, is so important, especially for navigating these milestones, for going through holiday seasons and all the things. I'll just finish this episode too by saying navigating the holidays just adds another layer of pain to the whole thing. And I said that earlier, but what I wanted to touch on too really quickly is, I'll just be very honest, for me, ever since my parents died, the magic of the holiday season has just left me, honestly. I mean, I still had fun. I would still like have fun picking out a Christmas tree. We have a fake one, but we pick one out at my in-laws, for my in-laws' house and stuff every year. And like, it's not that I don't have a good time, but there is an emptiness to the holiday season that is palpable for me. And I'm sure if you were listening and you've lost someone, even if it was in or out of the holidays, like you can feel this too. And I never really thought that joy would come back into my holiday season. And it won't, and it hasn't, because my parents aren't here. It's never going to be the same. And I hate saying that. I wish I didn't have to say that, but that is the reality, at least of my situation, right? It's just not going to be the same. And I find myself around this time of year really mourning my childhood. I miss the times when things were simpler. It was easier. I didn't have to adult today, I didn't have other stresses of life. And I think when a lot of us are kids, and I don't want to speak for everybody, I understand there's maybe many of us here that did not have a magical childhood, and that is a whole other level of grief to cope with. I am fortunate in that I did have a really blessed and beautiful childhood, and that is because of my parents and everything they did. And especially with my mom, I see and acknowledge the effort that she went through to make that holiday season so special for me. And not that my dad didn't, but it's like my mom was the one who bought all the gifts, and even well into my 20s, until she died, basically, was like having presents for me, like from Santa and stuff. She was just so silly. And just the baking and the cooking and all, there was just a warmth and a magic that the holiday season had that just doesn't exist for me now. And I cannot tell you how sad that is and how sad that makes me. And you can probably relate to that in your own way. And this is why I just say, with holiday grief and the holiday season, it is so much more than just the loss of a loved one. It is an entire season of our lives that has been permanently changed. Like, think about the gravity of that. That is not a small thing. That's a big deal. So let's acknowledge that. Let's hold space for that today, because that's a lifelong journey, a lifelong experience that we have to traverse and make sense of, and try and make some magic again around the holidays. And it's a magic that's kind of irreplaceable. And that's really hard. But I will say, and this is where I bring my daughter into it. Again, potential trigger warning for any parents here, but it is something that I am trying now. This is my daughter's first holiday season. I'll just mention that she's born in January of this year, of 2024. So I do feel a little sparkle coming back into my life around the holiday season. And it's because I feel like some of my youth has come back a little bit, and I'm just thinking of my daughter. She's so sweet. I'm just thinking of like the holiday season through her eyes. And I'm just so bound and determined to make it special for her, like my parents made it special for me. And I feel very blessed and honored that I get to do that. And I don't take that for granted. Oh, this chokes me up every time. But like I said, let those tears flow. So yeah, it's a really strange sort of like dichotomy of feelings, right? Like I'm grieving my own parents and my own holiday season and like my childhood and all of these things where, I was like, again, stress-free, parents were still alive, had lots of friends and family around because we lived on the East Coast and that's where everyone is. And my life looks very different now. And I have given myself permission to grieve that, all of that. And just own the fact that that's my life now. And I want to encourage you to do the same and know and realize and understand that it is so beyond just losing our loved one. There are so many secondary losses that come from losing a loved one, and then navigating the holiday season around that, and no matter when your loved one passed away, you know. And the last thing I'll also say, because this has also sort of come up recently in some comments that I've gotten on social media and people reaching out to me, and I just want to acknowledge this too, is guilt, actually, that I'm going to say I still carry it. It doesn't keep me up at night, but I still think back on it and cringe a little bit. And I wanted to bring this up because this is like about the time that it happened 5 years ago, where my mom was essentially nearing death. I don't think we realized quite how quickly she really took a sort of last minute turn. And I would say like a night or two before she died, I was living in a city that was like almost an hour. Actually, no, it was about an hour from where she was hospitalized. And my now husband, but then boyfriend, and I had tickets to this Irish step dancing concert, which was so magical. And what I bring this up because I actually did Irish step dancing as a child. Fun fact. My parents had me in it for years, and it's like we're pretty Irish, so it's like a big part of my childhood, and that makes me smile. But I had actually wanted to bring my parents to that concert, not knowing obviously at the time how bad my mom's health was going to be, and even my dad's wasn't 100% at that time. And so my parents wanted me to go, and we went. But that night, like in the middle of the night, my mom was like, she basically could barely breathe at the end because of the cancer and how it had spread and everything, and the tumor that she had. And she kind of, this is what I feel so bad about, and this is a whole nother story, but I feel like the nurses and doctors and things like weren't paying attention as well as they could have. And this is like a whole nother type of anger that I harbor around some things that happened, but I've let it go because I'm like, it's, she's gone, right? I can't hold on to those things. But she was moved from her regular room to the ICU that night that I was out enjoying my night at this Irish step dancing concert. Which, by the way, I know my parents would have been so happy that I was at. Like, I don't think my mom would have even wanted me to, like, be there and be watching all of this. And, how you just know how your loved ones would want you to be happy and living your life and, like, not worrying about them. Like, that was my mom. But I harbor so much guilt that, like, I didn't know what was going on and that I wasn't there with her. And like nobody told me, right? Like we didn't know this was happening. So, which I am, again, so mad that doctors and nurses and stuff didn't call us. We didn't find out until the next day. Of course, had I known, it's like all of those, coulda, woulda, shouldas, those what if statements, if only I had known, I would have done things differently. So I just want to end this episode by validating that there are things that happen that maybe we didn't know was happening at the time, or we were doing the best we could with the information we had or what we were capable of at the time. And I don't want you to feel guilty or regretful about that. And I know just me saying that to you isn't going to make that magically go away. That's okay. Even saying it to myself doesn't magically make that go away. I'm never going to feel good about that, about like having fun as my mom was nearing death. Like that feels so slimy to me. I hate that. But that is a reality of what happened. And that's something I've had to grapple with. And I have. But I've also given myself permission not to hold on to that, right? To let it go in a way to where I'm not, like I said, harboring that and it to where it's affecting my life. But I bring that up to say so many people that I've spoken to, clients, and again, just people, followers on social media, whatever, have expressed guilt and regret over things like that. And if you or someone you know is coping with something like that right now, I just want to invite you to open yourself up to releasing that. And know these things, they just happen. They are not anyone's fault. Sometimes there's no reason for it. There's no why. It just is. And that is one of the most annoying and difficult parts of grief that we have to deal with. And there's no feeling good about that sometimes, but that is just something that, as a fellow griever, as a grief coach, that I can just tell you, no, we don't have to let ourselves off the hook, but we kind of need to let ourselves off the hook. And I want you to know that it's okay to do that. And I genuinely believe that when our loved ones leave and all of that, like, those things are forgiven. There's no time for the darkness and the sadness and all of the things. When we leave our physical body and we leave the ego and everything behind, I truly believe there is only happiness and joy and elation wherever they go, wherever they are. And so this is just my little sprinkle of joy for you today. And I just hope you take some of that in and know that you are worthy of feeling that, and that it's okay to feel that. And I never want to put words in your loved one's mouth, but I would imagine that they want you to feel that too. And to not feel guilty about that, because we still have a life to live. And we can still do that with some magic and joy and light and all of the things sprinkled in there, right? So, all right. This was supposed to be a shorter episode, but I have rambled on for long enough. But I really just wanted to share these thoughts and feelings with all of you today in hopes that it hits home for you, that it makes you feel just a little more validated in what you are feeling, that it makes you feel less alone. This holiday season, whenever you're listening to this, doesn't matter. And like this episode sort of started with and implies, please remember there's no timeline. And if anyone imposes that on you, you just stay in your own lane. You do you in your grieving experience. And when you release any pressure or release any expectations or anything, that is when some real beautiful and deep healing can begin to take effect and fill you up. And we take it day by day from there, right? Because that's all we can do. So, all right, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me in this impromptu episode. But I hope you loved it. I hope it was helpful. If it was, please share it with someone else who could maybe use this reminder or just hear this today, this season, whenever. And please know I am sending you so much love, so much light, all day, every day, holiday season, all the things. And I'm so, so grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you for being here. And I will see you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, membership, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains, and on Instagram and TikTok at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. And remember to always keep asking yourself, how will I turn my losses into gains today? I'll catch you in the next episode.